Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host Brian Keane, best-selling author of the book The Fitness Mindset and Rewire Your Mindset, here to help you by deconstructing expert guests on all things health, fitness and mindset. Today's guest is a long overdue round 2 of the podcast with one of the greatest ultra runners of all time, Dean Karnazes. Dean was on the podcast back in October 2018, episode 182, Dean Karnazes, on getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And I completely fangirl in this podcast, as you'll notice as we speak through, because Dean is one of those people who's had one of the most positive impacts on my mindset, especially when it comes to the world of ultra running. Dean is the person I go to. His content is what I consume. His books is what I read in the lead up to ultra marathons, because it helps get my mindset ready and my thinking and my outside of the box and questioning the limitations that come up for me when I'm training for, any sort of ultra marathon or endurance event. So I'm a massive fan of Dean's work and delighted we got to catch up again in this podcast. In today's episode, we talk about embracing the suck and the silencing that voice that tells you to quit, why you're the sum totals of all your habits and how to create new habits that will support you, how running an ultra is simple and you just have to not stop, and how that's a metaphor for everything we do in life and everything in between. I'm not going to spend long on this description because there's so much here for anyone that is interested in ultra running or running in general, who is interested in mindset and developing a stronger mindset regardless of your end goal, and the way to think so that you can have a happier life based on choosing some of your suffering and choosing the challenges out there so that you can be grateful. That mindset paradox that training yourself to do difficult things makes life feel easier. So without further ado, here is round 2 with Dean Karnazes on ultra running, embracing the suck and silencing the voice that tells you to quit. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today with my guest, Dean Karnazes. Dean is an athlete and a legend in the sport of ultra running. He is also a 2-time New York Times bestselling author and the author of the great new book, A Runner's High. Dean was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world by pushing his body and mind to inconceivable limits. Among his many accomplishments, he has ran 50 marathons in 50 US states in 50 consecutive days. He's run across Death Valley in the middle of summer, and he's run a marathon to the South Pole. His list of competitive achievements include winning the world's toughest foot race, the Badwater Ultramarathon, and winning the 4 Deserts Challenge, racing in the hottest, driest, windiest and coldest places on earth. Dean is a frequent speaker and panelist at many running and sporting events worldwide. I'm looking forward to catching up on all things ultra running, endurance and mindset in today's episode. Dean, welcome back to the podcast.
It's good to be back. Thanks for having me on again.
I can't believe it was October 2018 the last time we talked on the podcast, but I follow your Instagram page, Dean. I follow the other podcasts that you appear on. I read your book, so it doesn't feel like that long in my mind. But for everybody listening, talk to us about the new book. I'm really curious to hear what the inspiration was for it. It's funny, I was chatting to you on Instagram, I was chatting to your publisher who sent me out a copy of the book. I'd already bought my copy, was halfway through. I have all your books at the house. I read them in preparation for ultramarathons because they get me into the right headspace. But this one in particular, A Runner's High, what was the inspiration? What kind of led you to this one?
Yeah, well, my first book was called Ultramarathon Man. It was kind of a coming of age book. It was kind of learning about, these crazy ultra marathons and these crazy people that do these things. And A Runner's High is now, a couple decades later. What happened to that guy? Is he still running? Is he still performing at a relatively high level? Does he still love running, or does he hate running? And, I wanted to delve into what happens to an athlete as they get a little bit older, but also I wanted to write a good story. To me, a good book is a good story that a reader can kind of lose themselves in. So hopefully it was a propulsive book, and it was, somewhat enjoyable and a little bit of escapism for the reader.
You're a great storyteller. Like, I read Ultramarathon Man back before I ran Marathon des Sables in 2018, and it put me into that mindset space. I reread it again before I ran in the Arctic in 2019 because you had the South Pole and you were talking about it in there. But your ability to tell a story makes a book what would be about running, which sounds quite straightforward, A to B, very enjoyable because you've got some great stories, and this new book is no different. And I'm going to unpack some of my favorite chapters because a lot of things jumped out at me here, Dean, when I was reading. But what has been one of the chapters that's been most quoted back to you? The book's been out now since July. I think I ordered it on pre-order, so I've had it for a good while. But what's one of the chapters that's been quoted back to you the most from the new book?
You asked some good questions. certainly the story of me running into the White House when I was running across America, when I got invited to stop in and see, First Lady Michelle Obama. People say that they actually think that chapter is really funny for some reason, but that one gets quoted back to me. And then also, as you know, it's it's a story about myself and my dad, and also a story about myself and my son. And something, an episode, I don't want to give away what happened, but an episode with my son happened during this Western States 100-mile endurance run, which is kind of the backbone of the book. And, that episode really shakes people up. And I won't say the conclusion to it, but it's something that people say, wow, that really threw me. And I was pretty happy to hear to learn the way things actually turned out.
With that, I'm curious, because we might unpack that a little bit more, because you've given me a kind of a segue I was going to come back to later on, but I'm going to ask it now. What was the most difficult chapter to write, and why? Was it talking about that particular episode, or is it another part of the book that you found when you were writing it was the most difficult to kind of unpack and kind of go deep? Because you go quite deep in terms of, you tell your stories, but there's a lot of stuff in here about mindset and really diving in. And I know you've had to do deep reflection like you do in all your books to kind of show what it took to get from A to B, whether it's finishing a race or getting your mindset right to do a crazy challenge. What was the most difficult chapter to write?
It's difficult to write about your shortcomings and to write about your regrets. To me, those were pretty tough things to write about. Of course, writing about my parents, and they've been to literally every single Western States 100-mile endurance run I've run, which is now 13 of them. So that's been over the course of more than 2 decades. Our relationship has changed in that time, and Father Time is catching up with all of us. And to see that and write about that is it's tough. But I still think the most difficult thing, I think, is being a parent and reflecting on, what you probably could have done a bit better when your kids were young. There's a saying in school, you get the lesson and then you take the test. In parenting, you take the test and then you get the lesson. So, there's things I definitely would have done differently, in hindsight.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's such a great line and so true. My daughter's 6 and it's a school day every day when you make a mistake or do something and you're like, oh, I shouldn't have done it that way. But it's a constant school day for sure. The chapter that jumped out at me the most, and again, you've said this countless of times, like it's one of the brain tattoos that I associate with you, embrace the suck. Talk to us about embracing the suck. I love this mindset, this philosophy. This is literally the thing that gets me through some of my longer runs, or I recently broke my foot, so I've been kind of rehabbing back to kind of full capacity with training, and embracing the suck, thinking this is going to be my character builder. This is making me stronger. This is making me mentally tougher. Talk to us about embracing the suck.
Yeah, you and I have the same mindset, and I'll give you an example I think that captures that. I ran home one day from a kind of a long early morning run, and my neighbor he was out picking up the newspaper. He was in his he was in his pajamas basically. He had like a big robe on, and he saw me running past, and he said, "Wow, doesn't running hurt?" And I said, "It does if you're doing it right." And he kind of looked at me like, what? He just did not get that mindset at all. But, a lot of people, they run from pain. They run from adversity. They try to, create a comfortable life. And I think that, the answer to happiness and true fulfillment isn't comfort, it's discomfort. So I've learned that, when things are really tough, and you're just on the verge of collapse and on the verge of giving up, to embrace those feelings, to really say, man, I'm gonna, I really can experience the full range of human emotions. The highs are fantastic, and this is a really deep low, and this really sucks, and this really hurts, and I love this shit.
It's so true. Like, it's a complete mindset paradox that training yourself to do difficult things makes life feel easier. How do you develop that, Dean? Or like, you've had years now of doing this and pushing yourself to these crazy challenges, but there's people listening to the podcast who are either aspiring runners or at the start of their journey or in the middle of their journey, where they've done half marathons, full marathons, but an ultra still isn't the thing it's an aspiration or a goal, but they know that there's a complete mindset shift that it takes to get there. And I think embracing the suck, it really is the foundation pillar at which that's built. How would you recommend, or what would you recommend to people that want to develop that mindset of embracing the suck?
Be a little bit fearless and sign up. I think, throw yourself into something that is above your ability. Bite off more than you can chew, and see how it goes. And maybe that's a little bit reckless, but I think you'd agree. We learn so much through experience, and a lot of times it's bad experience where you get your deepest life lessons. But what I found is that if someone is got the courage to toe the line of an ultra for the first time, they learn so much, and it changes just who they are fundamentally. There's a Greek saying, "O tolomonike," which means "who dares wins." So I just encourage people to dare.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, and it's the first step in terms of, if you don't think you can, you'd be surprised at the conversations you'll have, the books that you'll read, yours in particular for ultra. I've already said that to you, Dean, that one of my tools when I'm leading up to an ultra is I reread your books or go back over my favorite sections, because it just gets me into that mindset of, well, Dean did it. It can be done. My limited belief system of this is impossible isn't, because Dean has done it. I'm not saying I can do what Dean does, but it opens up my mind to that negative self-talk of I can't do that because it's impossible, versus, well, if I maybe switch my mindset and put in the work, I might potentially be able to do something similar. And I think that is very useful for people when it comes to kind of going from 0 to 1 or 1 to 5 or 5 to 9 in the case of whatever their goal is. Another thing that really jumped out at me, and it kind of builds a little bit on embracing the suck, was, suffering brings salvation. I think this is in the chapter "To Cut is to Heal." I think it's chapter 14 or 13. It's in and around the middle of the book. Talk about suffering bringing salvation.
Yeah, I think, in Western culture, we thought if we had every convenience available to us, every comfort, we'd be happy. And in so many ways, I think we're so comfortable, we're miserable. The suffering that we do is through watching movies and things of that nature. We don't actually get out and suffer firsthand. And, it might be, quote unquote, an artificial trial, an ultramarathon, but it gives you the forum to suffer. And high achievement in so many ways is about overcoming and suffering. And I think that when we reflect back on what had the most meaning in our life, it's not the easy moments. It's the really tough moments that we've overcome and conquered that give us the greatest fulfillment.
Do you have a favorite point of suffering or a favorite race that was the highest point of suffering for you, but you look back favorably on now?
Yeah, I always come back to the Badwater Ultramarathon, which is 135 or 216 kilometer race across Death Valley in the middle of summer. And I've done the Sahara race. I've done the Gobi March, the Atacama Desert I've run across. They're hot, yes, but Death Valley just takes it to a whole nother level. Just the elements that contrive to crush you are so many. There's the temperature, which is insane. There's the blowing dust storms where, the sand just gets in your nostrils and your eyeballs everywhere, sticks to your skin. There's the furnace wind. So you've got this, it's like a blowtorch or, a hair blow dryer in your face as you're running, just drying out your eyeballs, drying out your sinuses, and just cooking you from the inside out. So there's so many things that try to break you at the Badwater that if you can deal with that kind of suffering, you can deal with anything.
Has your process for races changed over the years, Dean?
I think I've become a little more humble, a little less egotistical, and I think that a bit more methodical. That going into it now, I'm not aiming for the podium anymore. If I can end up on the podium, that's glorious. But what I'm trying to do is give it my all, because I'm not a young man anymore. You slow down just naturally as you get older. So my commitment at the starting line is like, I'm going to just be the best Dean that Dean can be today. I'm not going to compromise in any way. I'm not going to leave anything on the course. I'm going to give it my all. And I think if you can be true to that, there's just no way you end up losing.
Did you find that egotistical approach, and again, there's lots of different ways to phrase that. I don't necessarily think ego is a good or a bad thing. It's a case of, does being egotistical in this moment served the end goal. Did it serve you at the height of your race career or at the peak of your race career, kind of having that ego-driven, whatever it is, goal system before you go into the race? Or was that something that served you and you've let go of because of obviously all the external and internal factors, age, etc.? Was that something that was helpful back in your peak?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's natural, when you're racing at a high level, the guys you're racing against, you see them over and over again, so they become competitors. Even though you have a friendly relationship, I mean, they're a competitor of yours, and I think we're all inherently competitive. And when you pass someone toward the end of a race and they're dying and you're feeling strong, it's a boost of serotonin, right? You feel like, wow, I conquered. There goes another one, but then on the converse, when you're the guy suffering at toward the finish and you're just trying to make it, and one of your competitors comes bounding by you looking fresh as a daisy, it cuts the other way. So I've learned that some days, there's a saying, when you see other runners in front of you, you're reeling them in, and I say, so some days you're a fisherman and other days you're a fish. So some days you're reeling in people and other days you're getting reeled in.
Yeah, if there's nothing that running doesn't do, is it humbles you from a bad race day or a bad run. There's nothing more humbling in this world. We're like, oh my God, I don't even know what to think right now, but I think it's really, really good. And I was just kind of curious, as somebody that isn't a naturally great runner and will never get even close to the pinnacle of some of the things you've done, but I run for myself. It's something that I quite like as the challenge, and I won't be hitting any podiums anytime soon, but I'm curious if my approach, if there's kind of strings you can add to your bow that could potentially improve you a couple of notches. So that's the reason for that question. One of the things that I associate with you, Dean, more than anything else, and we did touch on this a little bit the first time we talked back in October 2018 on our first episode about setting limitations. One of the associations I have with you, when I mentioned it earlier, was it expands my mindset in terms of opens up my mind to new ways of thinking, new things that can be achieved. And early on in the book, it's the chapter Growing Pains. You talk about, until you go over the edge, you don't know how far the edge is. Talk to us about setting limits for ourselves and the importance of not having that bounded limitation, or not having those limits of, I can't, my body won't do that. That's not for me. All this self-limiting talk to us a little bit about testing where the edge is.
Yeah, I think, again, it comes to that, the idea of never stop exploring, of constantly taking on new and more daunting challenges to see how far you can go and see where your breaking point is. I've maintained that mindset most of my life, and I mean, I think that psychologists know that we spend typically about the first 30 years of our life acquiring knowledge, and then the rest of our life we're just applying that acquired knowledge to situations. And if you can somehow continue to absorb new information and trying new things through experimentation, you don't have that limitation. It allows you to expand and I think more freely in every element of your life.
When it comes to applying knowledge and things that we've learned that you've said there, is there anything that you had to unlearn, Dean, that has supported you in the last 10, 15, 20 years? Is there any kind of philosophy or mindset or thought process that you had to actively unlearn because of, I know we talked in the first podcast about when you were working in corporate and your crazy run to whatever it was, 30 kilometers or 30 miles where you just kept running to see, where you'd get to. Is there anything you had to unlearn over the, as I said, the last 10, 15 years that's something that's just an automatic thought for you now?
Well, I mean, I certainly spent too much time in pubs. I had to unlearn to drink because I was a bit hooked up in too much alcohol for a long while, and that's a tough vice to let go of. But I learned that it's not just the alcohol itself; it's all the ceremony around it. So once I removed the ceremony around it, it just became something that I had a better relationship with, that I could easily regulate. So that was one thing I had to unlearn. The other thing is that, we're pretty much the sum total of our habits. So those little things that you do, those little actions, those get repeated millions of times throughout your life, and it becomes who you are. So I think that I've learned to really get very granular in looking at every action I take and saying, is this the best action? And, is this the most honorable way to live your life and to give back to others, and kind of use that filter in every little action I take. And just by changing the little things, it totals something that is kind of a life philosophy.
You may need to think about this, so take your time if needs be, because when you're unpacking something that you do habitually every day, it can be tricky because to you it's automatic, but to someone like me or somebody listening, it can be something that's so beneficial and a complete shift in terms of the way we see things. You mentioned there about being the sum total of our habits, and I couldn't agree more with that. We are what we repeatedly do. But what's been one of the most supportive habits that you've changed and stuck with that has benefited you in a very positive way? Now feel free to think about that, because I know it's so automatic to you now that there might need to be a little bit of reflection on it. But what's something that you've changed outside of the drinking and switching the vice and going into things that are more, what can be seen as positive on the outside, business wise, writing books, the episodes you do, the podcast, the amount of content you create online, the runs, the races, etc. But what's a very supportive habit that you do now daily and you've done for a lot of recent history that was something that you had to change?
Well, I've learned to become myself, and I'm very much an introvert. So I don't mind being by myself. And I think for a lot of time, I tried to occupy, all my waking moments with activities, seeing people, visiting friends, being social, those sort of things. And I realized that those were a lot of it was just hollow experiences for me. So now I spend a lot of time in nature by myself. And some people might say that sounds, like you're a hermit, or sounds very isolating. And maybe in a way it is, but I have a deep relationship with nature. And I don't think many people do these days. I think a lot of people, they live in their house, and then they live in their office, and they live in their car, and then they live in their screens. They really they're not out immersed in nature for many hours a day. And I think that's a tragedy, because I think, this is where we came from, is from nature. And I think it just makes you a more authentic human if you can spend time kind of as we were meant to spend time as humans, which, we weren't meant to spend time looking at iPhone screens, that's for sure. So I'm not afraid to go out by myself for 4 or 5 hours, and I don't try to legitimize me doing that. I don't feel guilty afterward. I just realize that it's who I am, and it's how I conduct my life.
It's such great advice, and something that I definitely need to do more of as someone that's kind of blessed to live out in the west side country of Ireland, and there's just nature all around me. I'm curious, Dean, is that something that you've always gravitated towards, that nature being the example here, that you had to reintroduce later on in life because you went away from it? Or is it something that you kind of found through running or through another experience that, well, I actually feel calmer. This doesn't feel like a hollow experience to me. This actually feels really good. Is that something you've always had since a kid and then you lost it for a while and then brought it back? Or is that something that you kind of found later in life where this is something that actually fills you up, makes you feel quite fulfilled, and makes you feel really good? What did that look like? What side of that coin did it flip on?
Yeah, no, it was very much the former example you gave. I was quite an outdoors kid. I mean, I lived outdoors, and my dad and I used to go camping all the time. We used to go hiking. I hiked across the Grand Canyon when I was 12 years old. And so from the time I was, my earliest childhood recollections are for being outside. I think once I graduated from uni, and then decided to go to business school, life got very serious. And I got away from those outdoor values and, pretty much lived in a corporate world. I was working, 70, 80 hours a week sometimes, and, chasing the dollar and, living large. And it felt unholy. That's the best way to put it. And I'm not a deeply religious man, but it felt like I kind of sold my soul, and I felt very incomplete. And then I started running marathons and ultramarathons, and all of that changed.
Yeah, we talked about that. I'm going to link the first episode for people in the show notes, because I think it's a fascinating story on it was ties it all together. You were working corporate, you were in a pub, you went running, and that was kind of the thing that was the velocity, or the starting off point, jumping off point for everything that came afterwards. I'm just to stay on that for a minute, because I'm very curious. You talked earlier about regrets and shortcomings, and I know this is in the book in terms of some of the stories and some of the things that you'd potentially change if you could. If you could go back, Dean, to 15, 20, even 25 years ago, in terms of whatever age bracket you want to put into your late teens or early 20s, when it comes to regrets and, owning your own shortcomings, is there any advice you'd offer yourself that you think would be very beneficial to somebody in a similar position or to a younger version of yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest takeaway is to lead by example. You can't tell people what to do. You just have to show them by being a good example. And I think with kids, that's especially true. I mean, kids are so quick to spot hypocrisy. So, a lot of people come to me and they say, well, my little Johnny is, he's overweight. He doesn't eat well, and he doesn't exercise. And, the parent asks, what should I do? And I kind of have to, turn it around in sort of a hard way and say, well, do you eat right? And do you exercise? Because you can't tell a kid what to do. I've learned that as soon as you tell them what to do, they do the exact opposite. And so I've just learned that, the best way to influence someone is to set a good example yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice. Another one of my favorite parts of the book, I think it was loose lug nuts. It was, if things are going well during an ultramarathon, give it a moment. And I will get you to tell a story from an ultramarathon for sure here, but I think this, in terms of a metaphor for life, is incredible. That life will get easy at sometimes, at certain portions, but it's not always going to be picking roses and easy. There's going to be difficult times ahead. And what I think endurance and ultramarathons in particular do is they get you better at dealing with the lows, dealing with the highs, and realizing that don't get too high on the highs, don't get too low on the lows. But when it comes to an ultramarathon and going well, and then something completely derailing it, which race comes to mind?
You asked some really good questions. I could name so many races that things kind of went to hell in a handbasket. Certainly what I described in A Runner's High, that final race, the Western States 100, wasn't my greatest race. And in a lot of ways, I think that they make a race that doesn't go well, has a lot of twists and turns, makes a much better story, a much richer story. So I guess I would go back to, that my most recent Western States that I describe in the book is probably being the most beautiful and the most disappointing at the same time.
Yeah, it's the high end of, the most difficult things to endure is the most satisfying to reminisce. I think that's a quote or a line from the book. Yeah, and it definitely runs through there. When it comes to ultra marathons and endurance in general, you talk about running an ultra is simple, that all you have to do is not stop. Like, it's on the inside, quote on the inside of the book, it's the first chapter, endurance never sleeps. And I think it's a very powerful thing, because a lot of us hold ourselves back. We tell ourselves to stop way before we're physically or mentally at our breaking point. When it comes to that urge to quit, and I know this has probably become considerably easier to manage over the years, but what's your self-talk, Dean, when that comes up? Or is it a point now where that just doesn't happen anymore? You don't ever get that urge to quit, you never get that urge to stop. But if you do, what's your kind of self-talk, or how has that changed if it's a case that you don't do it now and you did before? Because I'm very curious to kind of unpack, as somebody that struggles with that myself, that urge to stop and overpowering that. I picture it like a little, green goblin on my shoulder telling me to stop and just try not to feed it. What's your process? What's your self-talk for when you get that urge to quit, to stop? How do you overcome that, or pass by that, or get to the next point where you're able to push through it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think that, the mind tricks that I play on myself, I say that, how many other, I basically say, Karnazes, how many other races have you said you wanted to quit? And you kind of start going through the list, just as you said, like, I wanted to quit at this race. And, I remember that. I was so wanted to drop out. And then I say, and you've got that medal, in your garage, right? You finished that one. And I remind myself, yeah, somehow I wanted to quit really badly, and I got through it. And then I started getting more sophisticated. So when I wanted to quit during a race, I would say, okay, remember this one. Definitely remember this point, because this one you really want to quit. And, and when you reflect and 5 races down the road, think back on this one. So I really, in the moment, played it up. Like it was almost like a celebration of, yeah, this is one really sucks, and I'm going to get through this. And then, the final thing I do is I do a bit of what psychologists call forward projection. So I just project, 2 weeks from now, what's it going to feel like if you quit? How are you going to feel about yourself as a person, and how are you going to feel about life if you drop out of this race? And I think that, that chapter in the book where my son and I had kind of we started going down an unfortunate path is kind of like a vision of what the life of someone who quits looks like. It bit by bit just becomes a little less glorious. It becomes a little more reckless, a little more kind of falls apart. So, I always think, what are you going to feel like, 2 weeks from now? What are you going to tell your friends and your family when you quit this race? And usually I don't want to deal with those repercussions. I don't want to look my kids in the face and say I dropped out. I don't want to do that. And so that's pretty powerful motivation to keep going.
With the forward projections, you check in with that in the moment when it literally comes up, or do you take time away? I assume in the middle of a race, you're literally checking in with it as you're running. Is that right?
Yeah, real time. Real time, just saying, yeah, this I want to drop out of the next aid station. And then the next thought is, okay, what are you going to tell your next door neighbor? What are you going to tell your best friend Topher? I go right to those things I don't want to do and tell them that I quit. And that forward projection in the moment definitely propels me onward.
I doubt, Dean, you remember the advice you offered me on the first podcast, because you've done so many since in 2018. I will ask, because I will tell people, when I asked you about advice for races as somebody that was in the early stage of my ultramarathon journey, do you remember the advice you offered me? It was to do with aid stations.
Oh, never drop out at an aid station.
That was it. Which is
right. Yeah, that's really practical advice for an ultramarathoner. So I hope you've passed that along to other people as well, because I think it's so true. We tend to plan our dropout, midway through a tough section, you're just saying at that next aid station, that's it. I'm pulling the cord. I'm turning my number, and I'm out of here. And I always tell people, don't do that. I mean, think about the person that told me, yeah, I did that. And I got in my crew car and I turned in my number, and 15 minutes down the road, I felt like, wow, I'm fresh. Like, why did I drop out of that race? And I hear that time and time again. So I always tell people, get to the aid station, sit down if you have to sit down, have some food, take some deep breaths, regroup. And once you're fueled and hydrated, just start walking. Just walk out of the aid station and just keep walking down the path, and just walk. And eventually you get your energy back. And you say to yourself as you're walking, well, geez, I've come this far. Like, I've walked this far from the aid station. There's no way I'm turning back. And that just kind of keeps you going. And eventually before you know, you're running again.
It's one of the, on reflection, very simple advice, but oh my God, the effectiveness of it when it comes to ultramarathons is unbelievable, because as you said, you're picking up on momentum, and you're walking, and then before you know it, you're running and you're moving again. And ultramarathons, as you know, peaks and valleys, are up and down. But I love that. I just wanted to add that for anyone here that is into ultramarathons, who runs ultramarathons, or is aspiring ultramarathon runner, that piece of advice has served me. It's one of my brain tattoos going into races, and it's helped me ever since. So a massive thank you for that, Dean. Just to transition out slightly, because your book doesn't go into this in too much detail, but I'm curious, from your own physical standpoint, has your recovery methods changed over the years? Obviously, you've put so many miles on your body, and staying injury free is a big aspect of what you do. But in recent years, have you shifted more towards recovery? I know we talked in the last podcast that you've switched more towards a paleo style eating in terms of reducing inflammation, etc. But in terms of physical recovery, has that protocol changed at all in recent years?
No, I mean, my diet has changed considerably, as you said. So I've definitely now, paleo, completely paleo, mostly raw. So I don't cook a lot of my food. And I think that's really helped. I also think that, I've analyzed my diet pretty thoroughly. And I've also had a lot of genetic tests done and looking at, deficiencies, potential deficiencies. And I've started taking magnesium supplements periodically. And magnesium apparently is related to sleep. So I think that has helped a lot. The other thing is that I've taken sleep seriously. I never used to take sleep seriously. I just thought, okay, whatever, you can get through by in 4 or 5 hours a night. But now I really value a good quality sleep. And I think quality matters more than quantity when it comes to sleep. So I try to get deep sleep and not be moving around a lot, flopping around like a fish when I'm sleeping. Other than that, when you're really in these intense events, like I just finished running 10 marathons in 10 days in Greece in some really tough conditions. And after the marathons, we were having to, travel to the places we were staying. So there's some driving involved as well. So you're only getting, 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night, and you're pushing your body pretty hard during the day. There's just not a lot of in-between time. So you just rely on your body being strong going into it and as recovery. So that's, the one thing I do to recover is I really put a lot of effort into my training going into the race, because I just figure during the race itself, there's going to be no recovery. So be as prepared physically as possible going into it and just see how it goes.
When it comes to quality sleep, just to stay on that for a second, because I'm curious, I've had Nick Littlehales on the podcast, who used to be the sleep coach for Cristiano Ronaldo, the football player, the soccer player, and he's a big believer in quality sleep over quantity of sleep, very similar to what you said there. What are some of the things you would do to ensure you have a good night's sleep? Not necessarily when you're doing the 10 marathons in 10 days or doing any particular challenge, because sleep is one of those things that can just get forfeited as a result of a challenge. But generally in your day-to-day, what would be some of the things you mentioned? Magnesium there. Is there anything else? Nighttime routine, other supplementation, anything else that you would normally incorporate in to make sure that you have a good night's sleep when it comes to quality of sleep?
The one thing, all the practical things we're told, they're pretty ubiquitous, is, a dark room. Obviously, any sort of ambient light is a bad thing. So making sure your room is real dark. What I typically do is I have a black arm sleeve that I travel with, and I don't wear it. I just wear it over my eyes at night. I prefer that to a mask. Like, I think a mask with the cord behind your head to me is the strap behind your head is uncomfortable. So I just drape a black arm sleeve over my eyes for darkness, because a lot of the places I'm staying at when I'm traveling, especially if it's a multi-day race, there's always light coming in, be it from someone's flashlight or whatever. So a good dark room, cool temperatures. That's the other thing is, when you can have the temperatures colder than you would like just during the course of the day, definitely colder than your normal work day. And that's helpful. As you know, though, in some of these races where you're sleeping in a tent or, like southern Greece, right. Even this time of year is very hot. So, it was hot at night. And if you're sweating when you're sleeping, your recovery is definitely negatively impacted. And I can tell you that firsthand. So keeping the room dark. But the other thing I think that is essential is quieting your mind. And I think that is the toughest thing for me, is to quiet my mind when I go to sleep. And so I don't know if it's meditation or if it's a mantra, but I just basically count backwards from 50. And I don't let my mind wander. I just stay on those numbers. And, our minds are active and our minds skitter off in any one direction constantly. So I just bring my mind back to the countdown. I don't, thoughts come into your mind, start coming in, and I don't develop the thoughts. I don't keep going with it. I just go back to the countdown. And usually, I can't remember getting below 25 and I'm asleep.
That's great advice. I'm definitely going to try that tonight, because I have the exact same tendency of mind racing, and all of the solutions to potential life problems come in when you're trying to go to sleep.
I know the feeling, yeah.
You sleep is something you've changed your mind about in recent years, Dean. Is there anything else that in recent years you've completely done a flip on, and be it training, mindset wise, nutrition wise? We know we switched over to the paleo side. Is there anything else that you've changed your mind about in recent years?
Well, I think less than changing my mind is just changing my habits. And, I've gone to a commitment that from when I get out of bed in the morning until the time I crawl back into bed at night, don't sit down. So I never sit down. I mean, obviously, if I've got to go, if I'm driving somewhere or if I've got to be in a plane, I'm going to sit down. But if I don't, if I'm not forced to sit down, I stay on my feet all day long. Even right now in this interview, I'm standing up and I'm just in a pair of socks, bouncing up and down on my toes. So my legs are getting a little micro workout, and, I'm conditioning my feet muscles and my, all the ligaments and joints in my legs. So I never sit down, and I'm doing HIIT training throughout the course of the day. I have this, HIIT training, high intensity interval training. And I have this like 12 to 14 minute routine I do. It's all with body weight. So it's, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, chair dips, burpees, basically, a couple other moves as well. But it gets my heart rate revved, and it's done, like I said, in 12 to 14 minutes. And I do maybe 5 or 6 sets of those throughout the day.
How long have you been doing the never sit down? How long has that been a habit?
It's going on 10 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that. I have a standing desk because we're recording this podcast as well, and it's one of the best changes I've made in terms of when I'm writing, when I'm recording podcasts. You're just on your feet all day, which is, it feels better than when you lie down at nighttime. I've definitely found that it's helped with sleep, just to tie those two things together as well, because you're that little bit more tired when you go to bed. Dean, I just have a couple more things that I want to unpack, and for everybody listening, I highly recommend picking up A Runner's High, the book for sure, but any of your books. Like, as I said, I have all of them, which is funny because I think you were chatting to my assistant Gary about the book, or the publisher was talking about it. I was like, I've read all Dean's books. I was like, I have them all. I was like, I've gone through all of them. So I was like, I'm well schooled on it. But I'm curious, you're doing a lot of different things, Dean. Your Instagram page, I love. It's one of the few stories that I see. I don't follow Instagram as much as I used to. It's one of those things that for my mental health, I kind of spend considerably less time on it now, but I do see your stories, particularly when you're traveling for races and doing things, because it just lights me up and gets me kind of going when it comes to motivation. So you're doing a lot of different things at the minute, but what's the thing that you're most excited about right now currently?
Oh, I appreciate your comments on Instagram, because to me, I look at Instagram as to me, just the way I conduct my dealings is an instrument of good. So I just try to shed light, and spread light on people's lives. I mean, you're not going to see any sort of political things, nothing negative ever on my Instagram feed. I want it to be a happy place that you can go to kind of get away from all the other places that are so negative and conflict. There's so much conflict going on. So I appreciate that. And, what am I most looking forward to? Well, I've done so much with my running. I've run on all 7 continents of Earth twice now, but a buddy of mine had an idea of riding our bikes from the Dead Sea to the base of Mount Everest. So the Dead Sea is the lowest place on Earth, and obviously Mount Everest is the highest place on Earth, and then hiking Mount Everest. And I said to this guy, it seemed so weird to me. I'm like, hold on. Why do you want to use bikes? We're both ultramarathoners. Like, no one's ever done this running before. So let's run from the lowest point on Earth to the highest point on Earth. So that's what I've got in the works for 2023.
Amazing. And I can definitely attest to the Instagram page. It's where you go for positivity. It's where you go to feel motivated, to feel inspired. That's literally the reason why you're one of the pages that I still follow in terms of keeping up with the content. Dean, I just have one final question. And you've done so much over the years, between the books you've written, the conversations you've had on podcasts and different media. So people are going to be very well schooled with kind of your philosophy and all the amazing things you've done when it comes to the world of ultra running. But what's the thing you want written on your tombstone? What's the legacy you want to leave? If you get to have one sentence or a couple of sentences that get to put on your tombstone, long from this day, long from this point, hopefully, what do you want written?
I hope I can live up to these words, but maybe, I left it better than I found it. That would be, if I can live up to that, I think that's about, it's just something simple like that.
I love that. And it's so true. And I can definitely speak as someone that's had such a positive impact on my life from afar when it comes to books, and from the conversations we've had, and from following on social media. I'm so grateful for your content and for everything that you do. As I said, you mentioned earlier about leading by example. And I think when I think about how you conduct yourself, it's so true, because I take inspiration from it. You've helped me more than you'll ever know when it comes to ultramarathons and some of the races, for getting my head right prior and previous, before the lead up to an event. And I think anybody listening who's similar and has similar aspirations or a goal as a runner, to do something that I've done in terms of consumption of that content, because it just gets you in the right place. It opens up your mindset, makes you question your limitations, question all the impossible statements that you can attribute to some of these races, and it just allows you to push through. So Dean, thank you so much for everything that you've done, for this conversation, for the book, and for everybody listening. Where's the best place for them to connect with you? Is it following you on Instagram still? Is it through the website? And anyone that wants to pick up your books, where's the best place for them to do that?
If you want to learn more about me, I just Google Dean. Someone told me if you Google Dean, I'm the first Dean that comes up.
You are. You don't even need the K in there. That's Google power right there.
And so if you want, I've got a website, it's there. All my social media stuff, I think shows up there. And if you want to check out my books, any of the booksellers, both the Amazons of the world and the small independent booksellers carry my books. So those aren't hard to find as well. And they're available on my website as well.
And for everybody listening, I will link up everything we talked about in today's episode, everything Dean mentioned there, Instagram, the website, all the social media channels, and the book links in the show notes on briankeenfitness.com, and in the link on the description wherever you are listening to your podcast, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Overcast. You can click on through, pick up the books, go check out the Instagram page. Dean, thank you so much again for what you do, and thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you, Brian, and get out there and enjoy that Irish countryside, brother.
Yeah, definitely will.
That's some good terrain. I'd go indulge in that. Yeah,
I will for sure. Thanks again, Dean. So there you have it, Dean Karnazes on ultra running, embracing the suck and silencing the voice that tells you to quit. I said it in the intro, complete fangirl moment. Dean is somebody, and I don't follow that many people heavily when it comes to consuming content, but Dean is one of those exceptions. When it comes to a lead up to a race or an extreme endurance challenge, I read Dean's books, I listen to his other podcasts, I consume his content online, because it helps set my mindset where it needs to be in order to get through some of the challenges that I set for myself. So I'm a massive fan of Dean's work and his message, and he has a bit more of a balanced approach when it comes to extreme challenges, but you can tell that he's a family man and that he loves his kids, he loves his wife, he loves his family, and I really connect with that message. So that's why he's somebody that I look up to and find so much inspiration from. So I hope you enjoyed today's podcast as much as I enjoyed recording it. That's all from me this week. Catch you all next Monday.